Hi, everybody. Welcome to If I'm Being Honest, straight talk about book publishing and promotion. My name is Joel Pitney.
And I'm Sadie Walker.
Today, we are going to be riffing on one of the more confusing topics in the whole publishing industry, which is distribution.
Mm.
So, if you've spent any time on the internet looking up things about publishing, on Jane Friedman's website, Googling self-publishing options, uh, going into the back end of Ingram Spark, you've probably, or looking at a contract from a publishing company that's making you an offer, whether traditional or hybrid or somewhere in between, you've probably come across this word distribution. And one thing that Sadie and I have noticed, going to conferences, talking to people on the phone, seeing online chatter, is that there is an insane amount of confusion about what that word means. And for good reason. Distribution, think about it. Distribution is a very vague word. It
hmm
could mean a million things,
Yeah,
right?
and there's confusion and there's misinterpretation of the word and there's as we've gotten to know other companies, as we've gotten to talk to other authors, we've just noticed that sort of clarifying what this term means and even the different things that it can mean can be really helpful. And I will be honest, because this is our If I'm Being Honest podcast. Distribution is tricky for me to wrap my mind around, and I don't always understand it in all of the different terms. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity for the two of us to get on here and talk about distribution. I'm going to be somewhat vulnerable in the things that I don't necessarily know or don't understand. Joel has had a lot more experience with this from all the different avenues of publishing, traditional, hybrid, and then of course self-publishing. So, he's really kind of got his arms around what distribution means and why it might be tricky for some authors to understand. And I would just say that our goal with this podcast, of course, is to help authors make informed decisions. And so, as you're thinking about publishing, one of the things that you're really going to want to understand is what is your distribution strategy. So, maybe we can start with just defining this term. What what is distribution?
Well, it's an amazing question. It has different answers depending on what segment of the industry you're in. But first, I think I want to say, I kind of want to talk about what a lot of people think distribution
Let's
means.
go.
So I think a lot of people, when they hear the word distribute, including myself, when I hear that word distribution, and it'll often show up on a website, right, for a publishing company, right? Whether it's a hybrid or self-publishing company, and they'll say, "We will get you global distribution to X number of markets and hundreds of thousands of outlets." And so what that sounds like in the eye of the author is, oh my goodness, my book, if I go with this company or if I go with this service or I go with this platform, will be actively distributed into all of these markets, right? And whether you're conscious of it or not, there's this assumption that somehow someone will be pushing your book somewhere and that you will be generating an audience through that distribution process.
And sales.
Yes,
That distribution into these places means you will be selling books.
right. But but it doesn't always mean that. Okay. So we'll get into when it does and when it doesn't. But I think a cool way to do this is to let's talk about traditional distribution, then let's talk about self-publishing distribution, and then let's talk about hybrid distribution, which is, uh, at least in some instances, a combination of both. So traditional distribution, if you are going with a traditional publisher, it means printing the book and then distributing it to retailers. That's what that means. So it's sort of printing, fulfillment, and to some degree, active sales. So what happens in traditional publishing, and this is a very rudimentary explanation, but uh, what happens is a publisher decides, okay, we're going to print 10,000 copies of this book. Okay. And because we think we can sell 10,000 copies of this book. And then That publisher has sales agents, okay? And those sales agents are going to go to book fairs, right? They're going to go to the London Book Fair, the Frankfurt Book Fair. There used to be the Book Expo of America, which was in New York every year. They don't do that anymore. Or they're going to be going directly to different bookseller representatives. They're going to go to the Barnes and Noble people. They're going to go to the Amazon people. They're going to go to the Ingram people because Ingram is a big middleman in the book industry. They're going to go to Books A Million. I used to have lunch with the Books A Million rep in New York once a year when she would come for this big conference, right? Books A Million, for those of you who don't know, is a big bookstore chain in the South. And what you're trying to do is that publisher is saying, look, we've got this author, we've got these authors, we've got these books. We think that these would be great for you. This would be a really great book for your market. And so if it's a brick and mortar bookseller like Barnes and Noble, what you're hoping is that Barnes and Noble will order 2,000 of your 10,000 print run and distribute it to their stores across the globe, right? For Amazon, you're trying to convince them, hey, we're going to run this big online promotion when the book is coming out. We want to make sure that you, Amazon, have enough books in your facilities to be able to fulfill that demand when it comes out, right? And so you have a sales agent within your publisher. And so what ends up happening in traditional publishing is that not only did you need to sell your book to the publisher to get a publishing deal, you then need to then sell your book within your publisher's universe, because publishers, especially the big ones, are working with hundreds of books, right? Many authors are competing for their sales agents' attention, and those sales agents are working on commission. They're only going to try and push the books that they think that they can sell in large volume. So they're going to need lots of evidence from you, the author, to make sure that they can convince booksellers to carry your book, right? And it's not, in some cases, it's the book itself, right? You can look at the cover, you can give a synopsis, you can say, oh yeah, that's going to sell. Barnes and Noble will say, yep, if we put that front and center on one of our tables, that's going to sell. But in a lot of cases, you need to show evidence that the book is already selling, or that you already have a really concrete PR and marketing plan that they can be confident will generate a lot of demand for your book. So when you're going with a traditional distributor, it means multiple things. So it means the printing of that book in large batches. Then it means the fulfillment of those orders. So as the orders come in, you're going to distribute those books. And then the last thing with traditional publishers is that it means that they have a sales team that, if pitched well by you, the author, might help try to get your book into certain bookstores and other places. So that's what traditional distribution means. It's complex. It means a lot of things, right?
Right, absolutely. And it definitely doesn't mean that just because you got a traditional publishing deal, that your book is going to show up in a lot of different places.
I've gone to many of these conferences before working with authors. I've never done this for my own book because I'm a ghostwriter. So I've done this and I've advised in this process. And it's challenging for authors because they think, oh, I got a 6-figure advance from this publisher for my book. Doesn't that mean that they're internally going to want to push my book out? No, not necessarily. They may have given a huge advance, and you still have to work hard to convince them to actively push your book. Otherwise, distribution with that traditional publisher will be passive, by which I mean printing and then fulfilling orders that are coming in,
but not generating sales.
Exactly. The only way you're going to generate sales through distribution with a traditional publisher is if you are able to convince their sales agents to go out and get orders from booksellers that wouldn't have ordered your book otherwise.
Wow.
Yep.
Complex for sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So what then does distribution mean in self-publishing?
So in self-publishing, it's passive. It's purely passive. And the problem in self-publishing and hybrid publishing, honestly, which we'll get to in a second, is that when you see it in a contract, like we have a proposal that that says, when you sign up with us, you'll get cover design and interior design and distribution setup, right? So it sounds like what you're getting is active distribution. But all we're doing in self-publishing is setting your book up so that it can be printed and fulfilled. And in self-publishing, the vast majority of those sales are going to be happening through print-on-demand publishing, right? So that means that whether you're doing it yourself or you're working with a company, you're going to design the files used to print the book, the cover and the interior, and then it gets set up with what's called a print-on-demand platform. Ingram Spark and then Amazon KDP are the two primary in the industry. There are some other ones. And when you create an account with those companies and then upload your files and your book description and metadata and all that good stuff, your book will be distributed to all the online booksellers, the main ones around, right? So, but it's not being distributed anywhere physically. All
Right.
it means is that your book will show up on barnesandnoble.com. Your
It'll
book will
show up in a
show up.
database. It's kind of how I have started explaining that to
Yes.
authors, right? Is like it means that your book is in the database. It's searchable
Yep.
almost anywhere books are sold online. Does that mean it's getting preferential treatment, that it's showing up on page 1 of Barnes and Noble? No, it doesn't mean any of those things. It means that it's searchable in their database. And then whether it's Ingram Spark or Amazon KDP, when an order is placed, they print and ship that book. So in the self-publishing world, if I'm understanding you right, distribution is really just fulfillment.
Exactly. And print on demand means that your book is available on these platforms. Someone goes and buys it, and a single copy of that book is printed and shipped by the print on demand technology. So it's really just making the book available for sale in a database, like you said, and then fulfilling that order once it comes in. That's what it means. Now, it'll sound like it, Ingram Spark, you go to their website, it sounds like, a global database of this and that and the other thing. But all that means is that your book will not be actively exposed to people. It'll just be in a database where lots of people go to order books. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the thing that I love about print on demand is the accessibility that it brings when it comes to publishing a book, because you don't have to pay to create an account on Ingram Spark or Amazon KDP. There's no fees, there's no, annual fees or upload fees or anything like that. It's all free to list your book in those mechanisms. And then once a book is purchased and printed, you, the author, pay the printing costs, but that comes out of the retail price. And so there's no upfront cost for you to have your books listed in these databases.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool, versus like an offset print, which, is certainly an option for self-publishing as well, to be your own fulfillment and distribution and get a large volume of books printed, but you're paying for that up front. And then you have to have some way to warehouse and ship those books, which could get pretty expensive. So
exactly. And that just reminded me, Sadie, that is going back to traditional publishing. One interesting aspect, and this is one of the reasons traditional publishing is still quite good, even though a lot of people are talking about it being over, or ending or crashing or whatever, is that that initial print run, the publisher's paying for that.
Right.
That's $3 to $7 a book, right? They're paying, whereas in self-publishing and also hybrid, but in self-publishing, you are paying for every book that's being printed. Right.
You're just not paying in advance.
Yep.
It's just when that sale comes in. Okay, so you mentioned hybrid publishing.
So in traditional publishing, we have the printing, the fulfillment, and then sometimes the active sale of that book. In self-publishing, we just have the printing and fulfillment, right? And one thing I just want to say really quickly about being in the self-publishing databases that a lot of people get confused about is with Ingram Spark in particular, if your book is set up on that print-on-demand platform, Ingram Spark itself, and then publishing companies who are using Ingram Spark will say your book will appear in all these library and bookstore databases, right? Or they use an even more misleading word. They'll make it sound like your book is going to be in this catalog that's being shipped old-fashioned, to the bookstore, and they're going to go, oh, this sounds like a wonderful book. I'm going to order that one, right? No, that's not what that means. All it means is your book is now searchable in a database from which institutional buyers like libraries and bookstores can make orders, but they will never hear about your book through those databases. It just means that if you're ever able to sell your own book to a library or bookstore, that they will be able to then fulfill that order through their
Right.
database.
Right.
And that's a
Yeah,
critical
it is.
misunderstanding about distribution and
Yeah.
self-publishing.
Yeah, for sure. It's an important distinction. So that brings us to hybrid publishing, which is this weird blend of traditional and self-publishing. And
Yes.
and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, where a lot of the confusion about distribution tends to happen in this space of hybrid publishing and the way that they market their distribution to new authors. So,
Yes.
what does it mean in the world of hybrid publishing?
Awesome. And part of the reason, yes, you're right. And distribution is the thing that is most confusing about hybrid publishing. In fact, hybrid publishers often sell themselves as being better than self-publishing for several reasons, but primary among them is that a lot of them say they're going to give you traditional distribution, right? They also say that your book will get a brand bump from having their name on it, et cetera. And they also love to take a royalty percentage, even though you paid for everything. But let's talk about distribution. By the way, if you want to go a deep dive into hybrid publishing, a couple weeks ago we published a really cool podcast interview with Brooke Warner, who is the founder of one of the preeminent hybrid publishers, She Writes Press, and she's been around in hybrid publishing since the very beginning of that model. So check that out. But the way hybrid publishing distribution can work, right, is there are some hybrid publishers like She Writes, also like Greenleaf Press. They're another one. There's a great interview with the CEO of Greenleaf on Jane Friedman's website. You should check out. There are a handful of these hybrid publishers that offer some version of traditional distribution, which we'll get into here in a second. But they are called a hybrid publisher because you're still paying them to do the work. So just like in self-publishing, you have to pay for everything. You pay for the design, you pay for the editing, you pay for everything up front. Unlike traditional publishing, where the publisher takes that on. Also, any printing that you do in hybrid publishing, you're paying for, right? So traditional publisher is going to pay for that initial print run of your book, the 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 100,000 books. In hybrid publishing, you're going to pay for all that printing yourself. Now, hybrid publishing is layered. So how the traditional distribution works in hybrid publishing is your book will be some hybrid publishers will do a traditional offset run for you, right? So that means
you pay for.
You will pay for it. So different companies work differently, but they'll do a minimum. So they might do a 500 book order. They'll say, okay, we're going to print 500 copies of your book or 1,000 copies of your book. Traditionally, we're going to use, and a lot of them, they're using the same printing technology that Simon & Schuster uses. Simon & Schuster has a whole hybrid publishing arm where there's all these hybrid publishers that use their technology. And they'll print out a large batch of those books. And then they'll also warehouse them and then fulfill them when the orders come in. But you pay for that printing run. And that's very important, right? You're going to get traditional publishing in terms of the technology, the actual printing technology, but you're going to be paying for that. Now, some hybrid publishers will then warehouse your books for a period of time. And then as orders come in from different booksellers, they'll fulfill those orders, right? So that's not always going to be the case with hybrids. In fact, a lot of hybrids don't do traditional offset printing at all. They'll just do print on demand. That's why it's important to figure that out, right? So that is an element of traditional publishing that you'll get with some hybrids. But remember, you're paying for that print run. They're not paying for you.
And that sounds like that's still just the printing and the fulfillment.
It's printing and fulfillment. Exactly. So of the 3 layers of distribution, they'll cover the printing and fulfillment. Then there are some hybrid publishers, and not all, but some hybrid publishers that will also give some of their authors that 3rd layer of distribution, which is the active sales, right? So they will, and these are the hybrids that are selective because they only want to work with authors that they might be able to get behind. And even then, they're only going to get behind a small percentage of the titles that people pay them to publish each year. Okay, so they'll do a print run, they'll do the fulfillment, and then they have a sales team that will go to the same booksellers that traditional publishers salespeople go to. In fact, sometimes it's the same salespeople, right, that are working for traditional publishers and hybrid publishers, and you're pitching your book to those salespeople, right, alongside all these other authors, whether they're traditional or hybrid, saying, "Hey, we think that you could make some money off this. We think that this is a great title for you to be pitching." Now, what is going to convince those sales agents to then want to go and market the book? Demand, right? Very few of those sales agents are going to look at the book and say, "This is an awesome book and a really cool story. I can sell this." Usually there needs to be a tremendous amount of sales figures, pre-orders that have been built up, 300,000 Facebook followers, hiring a big New York PR firm. They need to be convinced, just like with traditional publishing, that it is worth them getting behind this book to then go and pitch your book
that there's
to
already
institutional buyers.
That there's already an audience for that book. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and I've talked to many hybrid publishers, and even the best in the business, they'll admit that they're only pushing actively, which means offering that third layer of distribution, a small percentage of their titles.
Right.
And they're doing the ones that have already done legwork to show that they have real demand and real marketing muscle behind their books.
So once again, a hybrid publisher that in their list of, what they offer the author, they say, well, we have traditional distribution. That does not mean book sales. That is not a direct link to sales. And I think that there's so much confusion there that when you think about distribution, you think about, well, that's my book on bookshelves and in airports and on in cases, and that's the book actively being pushed into these spaces, when that's not the case. And that's rarely even the case with traditional publishing.
It's true. And I've had experience in all segments of the industry, and I've seen it happen over and over again. Only the books that are already selling and that have a lot of momentum already are the ones that successfully score big buys from bookstores and other places. Now,
so
and also, and then, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just thinking, like, if I'm an author and I'm listening to this discussion and I'm trying to wrap my head around distribution, and maybe I'm thinking about going with a hybrid publisher, or maybe I'm thinking about, a company more like ours, which is, very author assist. How can someone get to the bottom of what a specific company means when they say distribution? Like, what are the questions that they should be asking when someone says that they offer distribution, global distribution, traditional distribution? Like, how do you suss that out?
That's awesome. I mean, the first thing to do is just ask the question, what do you mean by distribution? Can I see specifics? Right? But then there are some specific follow-ups. So one of them is, are you doing print on demand, or are you going to do an offset print run for me? Right? And if you are doing an offset print run, through what means? Are you using traditional publishers printers? Right? So you want to know that, because that's one of the layers, right? Are you going to get that traditional technology to print your book? Right? Again, it's not sales. But then the other thing you want to find out is, and this is the most important one, is, will you be actively promoting my book to booksellers? Just ask them. And you'll probably get slippery answers. I remember I sat on a call with an author who I met at a conference, and she was really interested. She had gotten a bite from a traditional publisher, and their contract made it sound really good. And she asked me, "Hey, would you sit in on the call with me to find out if this is real?" And we asked that question, and the traditional publisher, when we said, "Will you be actively promoting my book to booksellers?" he said, "The vast majority of our authors have had their books appear in bookstores."
Oh, that's such a non-answer.
I know, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that could mean anything.
Yeah.
They could know one bookstore that they get to. What does that even mean?
Which is why which is why we wanted to record this podcast, which is why, we've been talking about this a lot. The language out there is deceptive, because you are trying to lure people in who are excited, but also vulnerable. Right. And so if I can say, oh, well, the majority of our authors land in bookstores, that, of course, that's what the author wants to hear. Like, that's
Yep.
what we all want to hear. We want to go, okay, great, that's awesome. My book is going to be in bookstores. I can be part of that majority. And really actually getting down to the nuts and bolts of who is doing what, who is responsible for what piece, and what do these words mean is important when you are choosing to pay someone a lot of money to produce your book, and just for your own expectation setting, so that you know going into this, what are you actually getting out of it?
Yep.
Because when you break it, the way that you have so beautifully broken down distribution of these three sort of categories, for me, I'm going like, okay, well, why wouldn't you just self-publish?
Well, yeah. So now, after we've been critical of kind of the hybrid thing, because it requires a lot of criticism. I want to also say there are some great hybrid publishers out there, and they have gotten great success for some of their authors. The biggest hybrids out there have been able to sell large quantities of their authors' books to bookstores for some of their authors, right? So I don't want to, and I don't want to pretend like it's just a giant shell game and it's all pretend. It's not. Like, the hybrid model does exist for a reason. There is a niche in the industry. There's certain people who want to get a higher royalty percentage, but they still want to get, and they may be able to generate a lot of their own demand. I mean, no matter where you are, you're going to have to generate a lot of your own demand for your book. I'm sorry. Right?
Full stop.
Yeah. Traditional hybrid self, you have to generate demand for your book, but the hybrid model can be helpful in that, because if they do really have relationships with sales agents, and you have the data to arm those sales agents to make a big sale to Barnes and Noble, for instance, and then be able to do a large traditional print run that you're paying for, but still, hopefully the sales will pay you back, right? There can be a reason to go with a hybrid company, right? So I don't mean to just make it sound like everybody should self-publish. What I'm trying to do is just get really clear that the things you get from hybrid distribution probably aren't what you think they are, for most people.
Right. And, you mentioned a couple weeks ago, we had Brooke Warner on with She Writes Press, and she said this as well, that like the word is very confusing, and no matter what avenue of publishing you pursue, you want to make sure that you understand what they are offering when it comes to distribution.
Yep.
Is it just fulfillment? Just get to the bottom of that, so that going into it what you're paying for. Right.
And just remember, they are all going to make it sound probably better than it is. It's almost impossible not to. In our proposals, we even probably make it sound better than it is, even though we try to go out of our way to make sure we don't, because we want to make sure everybody knows exactly what they're getting.
Right. So, and we're, having those conversations with people up front so that they really do understand, because we hear it all the time. People come to it, they've been listening to podcasts, they're reading online, they're, trying to figure this out. And like I said in the beginning, I mean, this has been one of the clearest explanations of distribution I think that I've sat through, because it still would start to confuse me a little bit about, like, well, wait a second, if they're saying they offer traditional distribution, what does that mean? How is that different than what you get when you self-publish? And I think you've done a great job of really laying that out, mapping that out for us, what those different layers are. So hopefully this has been, helpful for authors as they're investigating their publishing routes and options.
Awesome. So, and speaking of that, if you have enjoyed this episode, you feel it's interesting, please subscribe on whatever platform you listen or watch our podcast on, and share it, like it, review it, all the good things. It helps us reach more people. I think you can tell, Sadie and I are here to try and educate and empower people to make good decisions. And so when you do those things, it helps us reach more people. Also, if you have any further questions about distribution, as I was listening to us talk, I know Sadie was saying, wow, it's really clear. But I was just wondering if some of the stuff we're saying is still massively confusing to people out there. And it would be understandable if it is. So if you have clarifying questions, you can always reach out to us. My email is joel@launchmybook.com. And we've got Sadie at launchmybook.com.